So wait, look, I'm not going to keep this in the, show, but what church you at? Because I'm like, a pastor who talks about the Matrix, what church you at?
We're called Life Gospel Ministries. We're in North Long Beach, and LIFE is an acronym for Living in Full Effect.
Welcome to 365 Brothers, the podcast. I'm your host, Robin Shine. I am delighted to bring to you brothers from across the United States and from various professions talking about their life experiences, their wisdom, and a conversation that also touches on racial profiling in the United States, how pervasive it is, what the impact is. And remember, you can follow us on Instagram at 365 Brothers. Also, follow us on Facebook at 365 Brothers, the podcast. If this is your first time listening to a 365 Brothers episode, make sure you subscribe because you do not want to miss one brother's wisdom, one brother's experience, and their perspective on life in the United States.
Today we're talking to a gentleman who was originally from Compton, California, which I now know as CPT, and who is currently a resident of Long Beach and has been for a while. He's currently the president of the Harbor Commission. He is a former councilman for Long Beach's 9th District. He's also a current pastor and a former labor leader. Today, we have the privilege of speaking to Steve Neal. Welcome, Steve. I'm excited to have you here.
I'm really excited to be here too, Sister Shine. Thank you for having me.
Before I ask the questions, is there anything you'd like to share with the listeners to help them get to know you better?
Well, I'm a father of 6, grandfather of 12, been married to my lovely wife going on 29 years now, and have been an activist in Los Angeles and Long Beach for the last 3 decades.
Wow. Okay, you are committed to the cause. What had you become an activist? Like, how did you end up there?
Well, I had a 25-year career working for General Telephone. And I started out in operator services, which is like, an entry-level job at the phone company. And I'm a outspoken individual, and my coworkers selected me to be their union rep, kind of represent the workers and on disputes in the job. And that's how I ended up becoming a labor leader. So I started out as a union steward. I kind of rose through the ranks of the union. I got elected to the executive board, then vice president, then executive vice president. And that was back in the 80s. I was a very young man then. And from there, I ended up running the union that provides the phone service in Long Beach. And we used to do a employee giving campaign with the United Way. It was a joint labor management campaign. And I ran that for a couple of years, and that ended up in the United Way actually hiring me to become their labor rep to represent the United Way of LA and deal with all of their labor unions. And that's kind of where my activism started. I ended up working at the LA County Federation of Labor, which is the best way to describe it is the union of unions. So there's 300 and almost 400 unions in Los Angeles that comprise this entity. During that time, we coordinated most of the activities for the labor movement. If you remember back in the early 2000s, Los Angeles was labor central. We had 2 strikes in the entertainment union. SAG and AFTRA went on strike. We had the janitors on strike. It was a big time in that movement. And then we also got very involved in politics, electing people from our ranks to office. And you see many of those folks now that I was working with 25, 30 years ago that are running the state.
Wow.
Anthony Rendon, Senator Maria Elena Durazo, folks that we all started out as activists in our union And it's a real easy jump to go from labor into elected politics, because that's
Wow.
kind of what I did. And that's really started it. And, me being a pastor, I was involved in some auxiliary organizations. I served on the board of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which Dr. King started here in 1964. I served on that board for about a decade. And one of my roles at the United Way was to connect the clergy community and labor and other nonprofits. So working in that, I was exposed to a lot of different things, from needs of nonprofits and needs of communities. And that's kind of how I ended up in policy. 2006, I ran for office, lost by 100 votes. And then I ran again in 2010. And for every vote that the incumbent got, I got 2.
All right.
I've been a policymaker in Long Beach, serving on I've been on the Transit Commission, the Workforce Commission, the Citizen Oversight for the Tax Spending Commission, and most recently, and probably the one I'm most proud of, is the Harbor Commission, which is a pretty big deal.
Yes, I know. The Los Angeles Long Beach port. Are we the third largest or the first? I forget.
Long Beach is the second. LA is the first. And then together, 50% of all imports into this country come through the San Pedro Bay, either through Long Beach or Los Angeles.
There we go.
I mean,
that says it all.
Every import that comes into this country comes between those ports. The ports are the economic engine for all of Southern California. In our region, 7 out of 10 jobs are tied to the port.
Wow.
It's goods movement, it's warehousing, it's rail to move all of those goods across. The goods come here and they go all the way across the country. And if you've ever been on the 710, you know what that is. That's a truck, because all of those trucks are coming in and out of that port.
I've been at the same school for 22 years, but we've moved about. And for about a decade, we were on the west side of Long Beach, and I took the 710 in. And let me tell you, if you don't know how big the port industry is to Southern California, all you need to do is on a weekday morning, drive down between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. and spend a little time on the 710, and it will become abundantly clear. So, well, we could talk all about that, and I know some of it may come up, but let's go ahead and dive into these questions about you. What is a favorite song or movie, either now or all time?
I love music, so it's hard for me to really pick a favorite song. But my favorite movie of all time is The Matrix. That movie came out in 1999. 1999 was the year that I went into full-time ministry. And there's just so many spiritual messages in that movie. It's just unbelievable. My congregation knows, I refer to The Matrix all the time. So if they don't have a point of reference, I tell them, you all have to watch The Matrix, because there will be plenty of references to The Matrix in these sermons that you will be hearing.
I love it.
Required reading.
I paid to see that in theaters 5 times, and I don't even know how many times I've watched the movie. It's so rich.
Unbelievable. Anyway, unbelievable.
It really is. Nice. Okay. I might pop by. That's pretty awesome. Okay. Let's talk about childhood. What is a favorite moment from your childhood?
You remember the movie Soul Food?
Yeah.
I kind of grew up like that. My parents are both from North Carolina. They're from the South, and they ended up here because my dad was in the Navy. So they didn't have a lot of family out here. I had an auntie and a cousin, but my aunt used to make this big spread every Sunday for dinner. And I'm talking about ham, beef, pork, just like the show, 3 or 4 different desserts. And she would invite over her pastor and his family. He had a family of about 6. My cousins would come over. So every week we would have that soul food vibe. And that lasted until, I moved out on my own. Those are my fondest memories. I just used to look so forward to the food and the fellowship. And that happened all of my life from the time I was 7 years old until I was about 19. But the conversations that were there, and if you think about this during, I grew up during the 60s, during the civil rights movement, the assassination of Malcolm X and Dr. King and John Kennedy and Robert. I remember all of it. I remember watching, President Kennedy's funeral. I was a young child then, but from that point on in my life, that's really when I got involved in activism, when I really look back at it, because just of the things that were going on in the world and, my uncles and the pastors and all the people that I was around and the things that they would do in regards to the civil rights movement, growing up behind that, it had a huge impact on me.
Is there one that stands out in terms of, something that was discussed or that you recall that you were sitting there and hearing these adults talk about it and you were just kind of like, I don't know if I would say your mind was blown, but you were just super intrigued or anything like that?
Yeah, I think around the time that Dr. King was assassinated was really when I, really started paying attention. So I was 8 years old at the time. I was in the second grade. Because up until that point, I really didn't know, my dad would listen to Dr. King all the time, but I really didn't know who he was until he was assassinated. And I'm a reader. So once those things happened, I just started reading. And once I started reading more about Dr. King, I started reading more about Malcolm X. And I think it set me on this path that, I still journey today.
Well, thank you for sharing that. One of the things I am excited about this collection of conversations is that the impact of some of these moments on people, like some brothers will talk about the Rodney King verdict or the Million Man March. Like there are so many different things that come up, but it really gives us an opportunity to hear from a variety of people how some of the events that, that we read about in the history books, like how it actually felt on the ground, Which accomplishment of the many that you have, first, which one means the most to you personally? And then of your various accomplishments, which is the one that most often gets the, oh, or wow. So let's start with the first. Which accomplishment is the one that means the most to you, Steve?
Well, I think the one that I've just achieved, the presidency at the port. I actually took over on Monday and I've been in meetings all week. And I think that's the most meaningful to me in the 112-year history of the Port of Long Beach. I'm only the second African-American male in 112 years. And what's ironic is the first, who was a personal friend of mine, and he was removed by the mayor when I was on the city council. And I was one of the dissenting votes. So, I look back on that and that had huge impacts in the trade world. The mayor was removing the president of the second largest port, the only African-American. It's very rare that a harbor commissioner is removed anywhere in the country. It was a huge controversy. So I was one, we have a 9-member council in Long Beach. The vote was 6-3 to remove him. I was one of the dissenting votes, but then I looked some 7 years later and I get appointed to that very same position.
Right. Well, let me ask you about the accomplishment that tends to get so which one is that?
I think it's the same one.
I'm not surprised.
You don't see too many of us in this space. Mm-hmm. Like I said, in 112 years, there's only been 2 African-American males and 1 African-American woman.
Wow.
I think I'm the 72nd commissioner. So there have been 72 commissioners, and out of 72 and 112 years, only 3 African Americans.
Okay, I appreciate those numbers because that really tells the story, And if I haven't said congratulations, congratulations on that achievement.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm honored and humbled, but I'm also going to push the envelope, for my presidency. As commissioners, we set the policy and strategic direction for the port. Like I said, I've been doing policy in Long Beach consistently since 2005. I've been on either a commission or the council. I always say, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're ultimately going to end up on the menu, right? So we have to be active civically. And what I'm seeing is that our youth, many of them don't see the value in participating in the civic process. It's imperative that African Americans be involved in policy making so that they can unequivocally bang for African American people. Because if you don't do it, who's going to do it? Right. It's not going to get done.
Mm-hmm. So hopefully the representation will continue. Let's talk about words.
Okay.
What is a favorite quote, saying, metaphor, or book, and why?
Well, a favorite quote is A. Philip Randolph, who was one of my idols. He was a labor leader at the turn of the century, organized the first African-American labor union, and was one of the reasons that the AFL-CIO kind of brought African Americans into the overarching organization for unions. But he said, power concedes nothing without a struggle. And it might even go back to Frederick Douglass, but I first remember seeing it from A. Philip Randolph. And that's, when we look back, and even the conversation that we've had so far, just talking about civil rights and the struggle that we've had as a people to strive for equality. It's been constant, in my life, that this equality for our people has always been an issue here. Mm-hmm. And regardless of the rhetoric, the numbers and the data speak for itself. Yeah. So that's kind of my favorite. And then there's a scripture in the Bible that I really like it, which is, according to your faith, be it unto you. What can you believe the Most High for?
I like that. Yeah.
Right. According to your faith.
In this conversation with you, one of the things that is starting to stand out for me is that in the past, the discrimination was so obvious. It was so stark, right? Because when you mentioned A. Philip Randolph, and I, know a little bit about, the Pullman strikes, and when I think about some of the leaders, even if we go back to Frederick Douglass or all the way to Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, the reality in which they lived wasn't in your face racism. It wasn't in your face inequality. And nowadays, it feels much more subtle.
Right.
It's more institutional, which, it's not like you can point to someone and say, hey, this is racist banking. You know what I'm saying? It's just your credit. We just looked at your credit and we said no. And so because it's, a degree or two removed from being in your face, it makes me wonder, again, this is just a wondering, but from this conversation, like if that contributes to, if there is a decline in African Americans participating in the civic world, if it's because it's harder to, you know what I'm saying? It's not so obvious what you're challenging, and it can feel very specialized. Anyway, just, I hadn't really thought about how it occurs differently, what we're fighting.
And I think you're right. And especially, you mentioned institutionalized. So one of the things I've been trying to change since I've gotten to the port is the procurement process. The city is on this, we want to open up social justice, equity. Well, in some of the practices, the port gives out contracts and all of these things. And we need to be making a push for minority business owners, for small business owners. And you talked about institutionalized. So, we're looking at some of the insurance policies. You have to have this $1 million, things that we wouldn't think about, that it would exclude us. So we have them looking at all of those kind of things that, we can tweak this so that we can become a benefit to the community in a broader sense without giving earmarks, because no one wants to do that. But there are some, the city of Inglewood has earmarks for construction, that all 20% of construction go to African-American companies, but then Inglewood has a Black mayor. So, that's the importance of having those kind of leadership positions where you can move those kind of changes. Sometimes you have to change it from the inside, right? We got to get inside, find out what the rules of the game are, and then make the changes there.
I love how you said that, because what I do know is that in many cases where there's, you wonder how come there aren't more African Americans or any group or women in this field. And then you have to look back and say, well, how do you get there? Okay, well, that the road to get there, while it may have made sense when it was started, like, is it still necessary to do it that way?
Exactly.
And was it designed in such a way so as to prevent being integrated? Because some of the institutions were, they put in rules back at that time to make sure that it stayed male only, white only, whatever, right? And then they just get passed down, and it goes, that's how you do it. That's what you got to do. And it's like, yeah, but since when, why?
Right.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. I especially appreciate you pointing out like insurance just as an example of like one little rule that could be difficult for a group, and no one even appreciates how or why that is, but then it keeps a group out.
It goes back to the point that you just made. The rules are set up to keep, and they're hidden, right? That's why you got to turn over every rock and nook and cranny to see what kind of changes can be made so that we can somewhat level the playing field.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, what is a significant person, moment, or event that either changed the trajectory of your life or it had a significant impact on your life?
One of my best friend's mother, she said something really striking to me when I was 26 years old. I had gone through a rehab program. Like I said, I was in my 20s during the 80s, and I got caught up in the crack cocaine thing, and I went through a rehab situation. That's actually how I ended up getting into the union, because I was at General Telephone. I was about to get fired. A brother came down from the union, and they put me in the employee assistance program and basically saved my job. Wow. And when I got out, I said, I want to do that. And that's kind of what led me into it. But while I was right before I came out of the rehab, my friend's mother said something to me, and she said, Steve, she said, you've always been a bright guy. She said, but you're afraid of your own success. She said, every time you get to a point where you're about to be successful, you do something to mess it up. And that stayed with me the rest of my life. Mm. And she told me I was afraid of success. Mm-hmm. She said, you just have a fear of success. And she was someone that had known me, since I was 14 years old. And I still hear that all the time. That was the turning point for me. It made me reevaluate, some of the decisions that I was making and how they affected the people around me.
Wow. Well, bless her for speaking it at a time and in a way that it landed, like the seed was planted and grew fruit.
Absolutely. It was that was 1986. That was a turning point for me.
and knowing the position you hold today, obviously you got over it.
Yeah, everything just kind of took off after that.
Fantastic.
Once I changed my mindset and became a little bit more focused.
Yeah, that's great. So how did you, what did you confront in order to, once you saw it? So she said it, Steve, you're afraid of your own success. How did you turn that around?
After that, I reconnected with my spiritual side. So about that same time, once I came out of the rehab situation, I started going back to church. And at that time, I started going to Fred Price's ministry. I think that was the thing that kind of grounded me. I got back into the Word and started faithfully going to, a Bible study, worship service. I was in church a couple of days a week and really just started focusing on being more productive, right?
Yeah.
I think I just grew up, but like I said, that was the turning point. Again, right after that, I started going back to church, and then everything just started falling into place. That was about the time my coworkers picked me to be the union steward. The job I ended up in at the United Way was the same job from the guy that took me to the rehab.
Oh, okay.
So I ended up doing that. All of that was part of the same thing.
Let's talk about a moment or an event that highlights or in some way signifies your experience as a Black man in the United States.
When President Obama was elected president, and I ran a phone bank on that campaign for the AFL-CIO that covered the states of Washington, Nevada, Arizona, California, and I think Hawaii. And went knocked on doors. So the thing that for me, I think that was my proudest moment was to see that accomplishment. But the other thing that I saw from President Obama being elected is, to your point about how the blatant racism, it seemed like it just came right back out in our face once we got to that point. Personally, I think we've been dealing with it ever since, which goes to prove that it's always been here. Racism it's ingrained in the culture of this country.
Yeah.
Think about it. People are still complaining if Michael Vick does something because he killed dogs, and Black people getting killed in the street, and people ask, what did he do? There's no concern for that, which goes to show how desensitized society is to the plight of our people. It's just common. It's not out of the ordinary.
Mm-hmm.
It's nothing to get upset about. So for me, the fact that, when President Obama took that stage and I went to the inauguration, and that's one of the best memories of my life, was going and just that experience, the experience of taking the train and getting there and sitting out in the minus, or I think it was 19 degrees that day. But I can't say I felt prouder on that day. And it really pushed me to push the envelope a little further too. That's
great. To my knowledge, you're the first brother to share that attending. I've had brothers share about the impact of Obama's presidency, but wow, that's so cool that you were actually there in that moment. Yeah, amazing. So you kind of mentioned how, and then it was kind of in your face again. Are you talking just generally that there was, well, actually, you know what? You don't have to explain. I get it, because I feel like in some sense, Trump, and not to get into politics per se, but just some of the beliefs that seem to be a part of those he attracted were in response to, the progress that was being made. It was like, whoa, too much. Yeah.
what Obama did really was, it was transformative in how he campaigned. And he proved something, and you're seeing the repercussions of that even today with all the voter suppression in the places of the South, because elected politics is a math game. Mm-hmm. If I'm running for office, no matter what office I'm running, if I'm running for dog care, anything that I'm running for, there's a win number, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever, you need this amount of votes to win this seat. Mm-hmm. Well, the basic math is, if my win number is 1,500, then I need to identify 5,000 people. If I identify 5,000 people that say they're going to vote for me, I'll get the 1,500.
Oh, right? Wow.
So it's all math. It's all math.
Wow.
And what the president did was, he got people that normally don't vote. He had a huge coalition of youth, of college students, but really people of color, right? And there is a emerging voter base that is arising, even in the city of Long Beach, that doesn't look like the dominant culture. And that's what they're afraid of. And that's why they have all of the voter suppression law. That's why they're trying to make it more and more difficult for people to vote. And that's why they don't want people participating, because it really does make a difference.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Especially locally. That's where it really makes a difference, right? You can really make changes that you can see. It takes a special person to for me, I loved the work when I was doing it, but it ate my soul, because, I'm a pastor, and politics is about compromise. Mm-hmm. God is an absolute. The problem we have with God is, he said some absolute things. And we try to interpret them the way we do everything else.
I got that. Yeah.
He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So, he's not going to change. So something's got to give. But I'm sure that part will come out at another topic.
So now specifically, I'll ask, have you had any interactions with law enforcement? And, one or two that you want to share?
Of course. Well, I shared my first encounter when I was 13. And then, I had an encounter after I got elected to city council. And I was driving down the street in my district. At that time, I had an Impala with tinted windows, and I got pulled over by an officer. And he told me that he pulled me over because I was on my cell phone. And I said, well, that's not true, because when I showed him, I said, there's a speakerphone right here. And when I talk in the car, I talk on the speaker. And he said, well, I thought you were on the cell phone, but I couldn't tell because you had these dark windows. I thought you just said I was on the cell phone, but now you're telling me you couldn't see what I was doing and then when he ran my name and found out I was a council member, he let me go. Now, what if I wasn't a council member? What if I wasn't the council member?
Right.
See what happens when, in the position I'm in, I'm tagged in Long Beach, right? There's a tag, right? Mm-hmm. So once he found that out, he was backtracking. The reason really he was pulling me over is because I had tinted windows. Mm-hmm. Like I say, me being in the position that I was in at the time, maybe kept it from escalating or going to a bad place. But I have 5 daughters and 1 son. And, I have to raise my son. It's like, she's got tinted windows on his car. When you get pulled over by the police, roll your windows all the way down. Put your, the conversation we have, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. right? Put your hands on the steering wheel, right? And don't get belligerent. All the things that we have to do that other folks don't, or at least the dominant culture does. I won't say other folks. The dominant culture, they get out and they argue with the police and ask for their badge numbers. It's just common for us.
It is. And for me, it's the fact that so many people don't understand or don't appreciate that who Black men are protecting themselves from are the people that our society says are there to protect. And it's just, like wrap your mind around that and how that would feel. But in having these conversations, this is when I really started to appreciate, started to understand the constant concern about which officer is this? Is
Right.
this officer? You know what I mean? Like, it's a wild card. That is a difficult, in my estimation, that's a difficult thing to live with.
Every encounter that a Black man has with a police officer could be his last. That's the reality that you live in, because you don't know who that officer is. And I say this all the time, until the police the police, none of this is going to change, because they know who that officer is in their ranks that's going to sit on George Floyd's neck. They know who that is. But it's that culture that they have about not saying anything. So until they're able to police themselves, and I don't know if they ever will, it doesn't look like they will. But for me, as an African-American male, every encounter you have with the police could be life-altering and life-changing, because you don't, like you said, it's a wild card. You don't know who you're getting.
Right. I hope that as we progress as a society, more people will understand that and not hear it like, well, that just seems over the top. I don't think you'd have to be that concerned. Like that's kind of the mindset. And so that's one of the reasons for doing this podcast, to show, in addition to introducing all these different brothers in different professions, but to also show no matter where you're from, that is a concern. No matter your status in life, that is a concern. Anyway, so thank you for sharing that. If, Steve, the United States was a woman with whom you could speak, whether she's a mother, a lover, a stranger, a neighbor, a friend, your call, what would you say to her? I
would tell her that because of the treatment of these people that have been deemed inconsequential, or the value that's placed on us by society ultimately is going to come back to bite them. As a pastor, what I see in scripture is, number one, the Most High is always going to judge injustice. And the scripture speaks about the blood that cries from the ground. There hasn't been a country on the face of this earth that has treated, number one, part of the problem that we have is we don't know that we're the people of the book. We don't know. There's a scripture in Deuteronomy 7:6. God does something there. He establishes something. He chooses a people for himself. He says, above all the people on the face of the earth. The rest of that book is about those people. We've been presented the book and told that somebody else was us. And we're somebody else. But we're the people of the book. And if you follow the scenario of the people, there were certain things that they were supposed to do. And if they didn't do them, things were going to happen to them. If you read Deuteronomy, the entire chapter of Deuteronomy 28, verses 1-4 are the blessings for doing what the Most High says. Verses 15-68 are the curses of what will happen if you don't do what he says. Now, if you read verses 16-68, and if you look at those curses, can you identify a people in the earth that fit that description? And if you can, those are the true people of God. So the scripture says that God is going to judge. And even though he's used this country to judge his people for their indiscretions, there is a judgment that the country itself will have to pay.
We got some homework.
We're already seeing that.
Okay. Look, let me tell you something. I already know when I get off the phone, I'm going to get my Bible and read that. I'm like, okay.
Two things. First, read Deuteronomy 7:6 and just think about that.
Okay.
So then read the entire chapter of Deuteronomy 28. Okay. Verses 1-14 are the blessings. things. There are some conditions. He goes into a covenant with those people from Deuteronomy 7:6. He gives them some instructions. He tells them, if you do what I tell you to do, these are all the things that I'm going to do. Okay. But then starting at verse 16, he says, but if you don't do what I told you to do, then these are the things that will happen. One of the things is they would be enslaved. Okay. They would be hated wherever they were. They would be few in numbers. They would be packed in jails. They would be the lowest in society, and all others would be over them. Is there anybody on the face of the earth that fits that description? No matter where they are, they could be in Brazil, they could be in Europe, they could be in America, wherever they are, they still face the same condition. Could that be the people that he's talking about in Deuteronomy 7? To me, it's quite obvious.
Got you. Look, I know I'm not going to be the only one going back through my Bible today. Thank you. Thank you for that. So what did you tell her?
I told her judgment is coming.
Oh, judgment is coming. Okay.
Matter of fact, judgment is inevitable.
That's even more clear.
Yeah, it's inevitable.
On the flip side, what is a moment in your life that exemplifies the meaning of love?
Well, I would answer that with, there was a gentleman that I worked for when I was in that position at the United Way. I reported to the president of the United Way. It was a very political position. So I reported to the head of the United Way, and I also reported to the head of the labor organization, which at the time I was there was considered the number one political organization in the country. And the guy that was running it, who I considered a dear friend next to my father, probably had the most influence on me in my life. He was more like an older brother to me because he's 10 years older than me. He was the one who set me down early and said, I'm going to position you to become a leader in the Black community. And he was a leader in the Hispanic community. When he would call, if people were on the floors of the state capitol, they took his call. That's who he was, right?
Okay.
Or if he showed up at the state capitol without a meeting and he wanted to meet with the speaker, he's going into, this is who he was. But what he told me, and, I used to drive him around, I'd sit in these meetings with the Latino caucus and see how they work. And he said, I'm going to position you to be a leader in the Black community. He said, but I can't do the work for you. He said, I can put you in places where you will represent me on their behalf. But he said, you have to take those opportunities to become a leader, going back to my quote about power is nothing. And I thought that really showed our friendship, and really I'm where I am now as far as the political side and all that policy stuff because of that. Mm-hmm. And he did the same thing. You know who Karen Bass is, right?
I surely do. Yes.
Well, Karen Bass came into his office. This is when she was running Community Coalition. She came into his office to ask him for money for her fundraiser, and she left out of there running for the state assembly. That's the kind of impact that this guy had. Wow. That was. And
by the way, listeners, she did in fact become speaker for the California Assembly, or the state equivalent of House of Reps.
She was the first African American woman as speaker. Now she's our congresswoman. But he, even being Latino, he recognized what I'm talking about is that we have to work together, and we need leadership. And he helped position people like Karen and myself, and there's others too, Martin Ludlow. There's others that have gone on, and names that but he helped position us to be kind of who we are, put us in those spaces. And like you said, that was something that I wasn't expecting. And the fact that, he would see something that I didn't even know was there. It's proven to be right because, I think I fared pretty well for our people and policy at the places God has allowed me to be at.
Yeah.
My whole thing is, can we make whatever office I have, if I can leave it a little bit better than I found it, then I did my job. That's outside of my family. Because, when you talk about love, you always think about your wife, your kids, your mom. But I want to, that was an act that caught me off guard. I kind of disregarded it at first, but now I look back some 20 years later and he was right on point. And I'm really grateful for that.
What I love about that example is, for me anyway, I hear so many layers of love, because there's the love that he has for the people that he's mentoring, that he's positioning. And simultaneously, what's evident is a love of his community, a love of the nation, of the state. You know what I'm saying? Like, all of that is layered in that kind of work.
You're absolutely spot on. And it was really a broad and very inclusive in how he moved, like you said, in the community.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So what is a practice that has served you well in life? Please be specific. What do you do? How often? And how did you discover it or come across it or adopt it?
Well, of course, my spiritual health is probably the biggest practice. I study daily, but along with that, especially now, I'm in my 60s now, I have to take care of the temple. So the practice for me that really helps get me my head in the right place is my study of scripture. Mm-hmm. And then the physical component, I feed my spiritual side and my physical side. As we get older, we have to take care of this temple to do the work that he's called us to do. So I'm a lot more conscientious of my health now, only because I'm getting older. So I try to maintain a workout regimen of 3 to 4 days a week. And I know I've gone a long way around, but it's the spiritual side, my love for the word, and then really just doing my exercises to keep this temple fit. I want to be here as long as I possibly can.
Well, when you're enjoying your life and living the life that you were purposed to live, you feel that way.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
I get it. So now that we've had this conversation, what did you, Steve, get for yourself personally out of participating in this conversation?
Well, when you delve into these kind of questions, it really makes you reevaluate and look back at the things that really informed who you are, right? Because we're all a composite of our experiences, right? You're in your 50s, I'm in my 60s. I'm at a place now where it's almost like the Matrix. I can see the other side. That's why that movie that's why it's so significant to me. Now, I'm probably going to end up watching it this weekend now, because periodically I got to get charged. But I think what this did, and having this conversation, is really helping me to refocus, because I believe that I have a mission and a calling. And like I said, when God opens a door, my thing is to walk through. You become blessed to be a blessing. And I think for me, having this insightful conversation strengthened my resolve that we still got a little more work to do. And collectively, as we become a more unified people, the word says, in the land of their captivity, they come to themselves. That's a prophecy that hasn't come to pass yet, but we're quickly approaching. The biggest thing for our people is disunity. Once we unite, and that uniting is going to be a mental uniting first and then a physical uniting, but the word says that it has to happen, and every word written must come to pass. So I believe we're quickly approaching that, and I believe God is preparing that, and he's preparing the soil, and people like you reaching out to all these different brothers and getting this composite. You're going to see some things, how all of us are different, but we're all moving kind of in the same way. And,
absolutely.
there's something that's happening. There's something that's happening in the spiritual realm that we need to tap into the natural realm. And all of this is purposeful and moving us into that. That's kind of what I got.
Look, and on that, I'll say amen. Well, it has been a delight. And I'm always left with an impression myself from each brother, and giving. That is the word that is there for me about you. And it's distinct from saying generous, because there's nothing wrong with generous. And I've talked to many brothers who are generous, but I instead use the word giving because it is as if that is your purpose. Like you live from giving. It's not something you occasionally do, which is how I view generous, right? Like it's something that's done too, versus being a giving human being is just who you always are, no matter what position you're in. And in all the positions you hold, you're constantly giving uplift, you're giving inspiration, you're giving knowledge, you're giving opportunity. And so thank you for being a giving man.
Thank you. That's telling. I appreciate that.
Remember, you can follow us on Instagram at 365 Brothers. Also, follow us on Facebook at 365 Brothers, the podcast. Lastly, I just want to let you know, producing a podcast, it takes something, and I'm really grateful to have partnered with alitu.com. They make publishing easy. There's a link in the show notes for anyone who either has a podcast or is thinking about a podcast. You don't need to learn all that sound balancing and compression. Save all that. Use your time for what matters, interviewing and sharing the stories that your podcast brings. Thank you for listening to 365 Brothers. Certainly hope you enjoyed the episode. I encourage you to subscribe. Please leave a review. I want to know what you think. Also, if you know someone who would be a fantastic guest for 365 Brothers, please direct them to our website, 365brothers.com. You'll also find all the episodes there, 365brothers.com. And your support is welcome. And remember, to listen is to love.